Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Software Sales Simplified, Move to Success, your one-stop shop for learning the latest and greatest in the world of enterprise software sales. Whether you're a veteran or just new to the industry, please make our podcast your go-to resource for becoming a better seller. I'm Kevin Donville. I am your co-host on today's show, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Matt Long. Now, today we're going to be talking about what it takes to drive sales leadership and some of the challenges that have been coming up in the market today. Team building, pushing back on leadership. Matt, you've never experienced there being unrealistic expectations, or have you?
Maybe once or twice. There seems to be a little disconnect between what expectations are and what the realities are. So being able to navigate that appropriately is incumbent upon, the organization's success as well as your own personal success. So I'm looking forward to this conversation today.
I am too. And to guide us through this conversation today, we are bringing in a gentleman who has a lot to say about this particular topic. His name is Corey Bruce. Corey, how are you doing today? Thank you for being on the show.
You bet. My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Doing pretty well. Thanks for a Monday afternoon.
Yeah, it is Monday. Mondays can be rough, especially in the wild world of technical sales, right? But you had some wonderful news today. You started your day off just right, didn't you? You had some successes there.
Oh, we did. Yeah, we were chasing a deal for the last few weeks, driving the team, as we'll get into it probably here shortly, about taking over a business. I was week 6 into this thing, and we're trying to drive a multi-year $300,000 deal, and chased it through the weekend, multiple different continents, global deal, and got the DocuSign signed, and everybody lit up the Christmas tree. I mean, that's the best way to start a Monday, in my opinion.
Banging the drum or banging the gong, lighting the Christmas tree, whatever metaphor you want to use, and sometimes not a metaphor. I've been places where they're actually banging a gong in the sales room. It is a fantastic way to go and start off a Monday. Now, Corey, you've got a fantastic and very interesting background, one that we're going to explore a little bit on the call today, but our audiences, they don't know you. Can you take a minute, take the floor, tell everybody a little bit about yourself, your background, your experience, where you are now, and what you do there?
You bet. Geez, I've been in sales and software as a service sales since the late 90s, actually, before Amazon Web Services and Azure existed, getting my start in heavy civil construction training. So back before everything was posted online, it was more like death by PowerPoint and voiceover. Coming from the construction side, how do we get content online? So as part of a startup company out of the Bay Area where I'm originally from, just a little bit north of Silicon Valley, how fitting, right, for a startup company, and got into scaling these businesses with subject matter expertise, and then got rolled up through multiple different private equity companies, which was kind of the launch pad for a lot of us, where growth equity kind of latched on and started investing in buying and acquiring companies. And so I've spent my entire career virtually scaling a startup software as a service business in the environmental health and safety arena, where I am today as a CEO running another global EHS company, competing in a very saturated and commoditized environment, which is fitting for sales 101 today.
Commoditized, no competition then, easy peasy. Every deal just falls off the table, right?
How'd you guess? Bluebird shooting fish in a barrel.
Absolutely. This software practically sells itself, right?
That's it, right? Every manager's favorite saying, or leadership that's out of touch, it sells itself. Okay.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, with respect to that, you've had an interesting path up through the software sales world. And as a result, I'm really looking forward to getting your perspectives on a couple of these things, especially when it comes down to the whole leadership. Now, you're now CEO, so talk about, the buck stops on your table, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Sure does. Ultimate authority. You get blamed for stuff you don't do, and you get no credit for stuff you do. And you got to make all the heavy decisions every single day. And you got people's lives depending upon you. So it's an interesting spot to be in.
Heavy wears the crown. Yes, heavy wears the crown. So having been in leadership positions, all three of us here on this call, and probably several of the people that are listening to the call today, people don't realize how much of an analogy of Game of Thrones can have to the whole software sales leadership positions these days.
Mm-hmm.
But, with respect to that, you kind of hit on it there with one of the comments you made. You are responsible for all the decisions, and that whole leadership background can be very stressful and is not necessarily for the faint of heart. But there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. I know that part of the reason why, when you and I were talking earlier on, your path to getting to the position you're in now had to do with people taking a risk with you and you taking risks with your career and people that were willing to invest and grow you. How important was that whole investing in people and you getting to where you are today?
I mean, it's paramount. And I would venture to guess for, the three of us on this call and any other listeners or people that will listen is you have to be able to trust people, but you have to be willing to take a calculated risk.
Mm,
As we were speaking a few weeks ago, kind of teeing this up, I was complimentary of my former CEOs or CROs or whatever the role was that was hiring me. Was you do your best to interview well, you be transparent about who you are, but really it's gambling. You
mm,
suss people out and figure out, does this person have the emotional intelligence to do the job? Do they have the grit and the tenacity and the discipline? We're all going to make mistakes. You're never going to find the perfect candidate, but they were willing to invest in you and roll those dice. And if you work hard enough, ultimately the goal is for all of us to be successful, whatever, that looks like, whether it's a company acquisition or driving revenue or just growing the company. But
mm.
it's a big deal because that's where your character is on the line. And now you have an obligation to perform once the offer letter's sent in and you sign and sing kumbaya, and it's ready to go and hit the runway moving.
So what are some of the tactics and the principles you've put into practice inside the organizations that you're working in with respect to kind of making that manifest inside the organization?
Yeah. So I guess first and foremost, I was thinking about this session today, and one of the biggest things that I've learned, I think we all know, is I was just sharing this weekend with somebody, kind of giving them some coaching and mentoring. Was we don't learn when things go well. We learn the best when things go poorly wrong, or we've made a very bad decision and we own it. But you look back and say, what could I have done differently? And so when
Mm,
you move up to a leadership role, I think this is where the rubber hits the road in terms of what are you made of. When let's say you're an individual contributor, you could be super good at that, right? And then think this is the challenge that a lot of us have is when people move up in the ranks, is it because they think they're supposed to, just because it's kind of the up and out, right? You go up as far as you can. If you're no longer growing, then you go out and you go somewhere else, and then you do the rinse and repeat. But I
mm,
think oftentimes, especially in sales, is just because you have a really good salesperson doesn't mean they have to move. Maybe they stay in their lane and they're really, really good at executing and hitting the quarterly targets or annual quota, and then accelerators kick in. And too often people want to become managers, but who's poured into them? And I thought about this kind of like one-on-ones. Well, who taught you how to do your weekly one-on-one? Well, my manager. Well, who taught them? Well, their
mm,
manager. Who's to say that this is the right way? So as I've now gotten into leadership roles, I'm thinking, can we just take a break for a second and think, why are we doing these one-on-ones? Or what am I doing to ensure that I'm building up my team members? Because the goal is, and you and I talked about this, is to teach them how to do their jobs maybe even better than us, right? It's all about leadership,
mm,
because we don't
mm,
want to be the bottleneck. We want to make sure that our team members are, Steve Jobs said it, we hire great people and they tell us what to do, not tell them what to do. We give them coaching, of course, and guidance. So things that I've learned are candid conversations and accountability on a weekly basis, and give them a bone and
mm.
say, this is what good looks like. How are we going to get there together?
Yeah, I take it you stepped into the CEO role at SafetyIQ. Is that right? So I'm assuming you inherited a sales team and a sales leader, things like that. How are you working with them? Especially coming from a sales background yourself, giving them the autonomy, but also making sure you're aligned. What was that like in terms of when you first entered the company and your relationship going forward?
That's a really good question. And the board knew it would be interesting because they liked that I had a sales background. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, I personally believe really good CEOs come from sales for a couple of reasons. One is we understand people, pricing, and
Mhm,
product.
mhm,
I mean, you've been in the trenches with the customers and marketing teams. And so I think it helps you pull the levers differently. So getting into your question, Matt, number one goal is always is to ask questions and listen, not fix things too soon. I had a bunch of people come at me, literally one of my very first one-on-ones. They said, can I report to you? And we have all these things to fix. And I'm like, I really think that's great, but if I don't know what's going on, how can I fix what I don't know if it's not broken or not, right? Because as people, we're really good at chasing problems or trying to fix problems that may not exist. Again, we've all done it. I have. And so just understanding, how are we selling our product? What's our pitch? Do we know what our ICP? I literally started from the floor up saying, do we know our company internally first? If not, then we need to figure that out, because there were some challenges of, well, we're not selling well. Well, start with why, right? Simon Sinek, great book, Start with Why. So that's what I did the first few weeks, was having one-on-ones with literally every person in the company. Within week one, I committed to one-on-ones and I completed those, and then continued to take notes and figure out, kind of what my assumptions are and suss those out as well.
Yeah, it's super important in a leadership role, and I applaud you for doing what you just did and doing it so quickly, is to establish a communication and channel with the folks that are going to be reporting up to you. And when you're having those conversations, to make them candid, you got to, I remember having these conversations with one of my CEOs, which is, my job is to deliver to you bad news if there's bad news to deliver, not to sugarcoat it. Because if I'm not being directly honest and painfully direct with you, I'm of no use to you out in the field.
That's spot on, because
Yeah.
I think it does a disservice to everybody. And as leaders, leadership is not easy. And I think a lot of people confuse that. Like, again, with managers, leadership is a lonely job. You have to make critical decisions that affect people and their families and livelihoods. You've got board of directors, and in my situation, boards and growth equity companies with tens of millions of dollars of capital investment and a runway to, let's be real, an acquisition or some kind of merger, some financial transaction. So if we're sitting around tap dancing around employees about feelings, we're all adults. We should. I make mistakes. I kind of joked. I'm like, I'm married. My wife will tell me if I make a mistake. I'm joking, but it's true. But we have to be willing to be able to have those, what I call crucial or critical conversations, because it's my job to improve myself, but it's my job to improve my employees. And if I wait, I'm hurting the business. So if I don't fix something early on and say, in that demo, you didn't even qualify if they had budget, why would I let that last? Because then it's going to go through HubSpot. And then we're going to wonder why our data looks bad and why our close loss reasons for no budget so high. That's on me. I've got to fix that. And if people can't palate it, either I have a leadership issue on my side, or we've hired the wrong people, or maybe they're not trainable or coachable.
Yeah, I think one of the key things that anytime something new happens, a new leader comes in, or you're introducing a new solution to a potential prospect, there's always the fear and anxiety and unknown that comes with it, right? And I love the approach of just listening, right? And we tell all the sellers we work with, just start by listening, understand, what they envision this is going to look like, or what their fears are, or some of the things that they're uneasy about, right? So it's such a nice way to come in and be present and be available and just really take in information before you start, spouting off the things that are going to change right away as soon as you're out the door.
It is. One of the things, it's funny getting older, you look back on decades now of all the life's lessons, and maybe this is where wisdom comes into play. I've been very fortunate to have some wonderful mentors in my life. Some were, NASDAQ CEOs and, worked in multi-billion-dollar companies. And so I had direct access to these guys, chairmen of the boards and things like that. And so one of the things I've looked at is, just because you have something to say, one, doesn't mean you need to say it. But when I look at the generations and older executives, they speak fewer words and they listen. Instead of listening to respond, they listen to gather knowledge. And I think that's something that's really important that I need to consider. And to your point, Matt, I walk into this role, they're like, who's the new guy? I mean, I get it. It's like, because we've all been there. And I use that actually as a launch pad, saying, hey, listen, I've been in your shoes. One, leaders lead with empathy. I've been in your shoes. I've had CEOs and new leaders from the growth equity companies installed and saying things are going to be different. And then what do we know? Things weren't different. We didn't get budget. So I try to use my experiences to not make those same mistakes and hurt those people, and actually drive. I really want to drive a different company and culture that people are excited to show up at every day.
Yeah, I remember that old adage, that's why you're born with two ears and one mouth, so you can do more listening than you do talking. A lesson that clearly I have not mastered yet in my professional or personal life. But, I'm striving towards it. But that's a great thing. You get all those perspectives. You find out where your weak spots are in the organization, operationally, structurally, procedurally. But it also kind of gives you an insight as to where you may still have gaps inside of your organization. Is that not right?
It absolutely is right. It's funny you say that. I literally have mentioned gaps in a lot of my calls and my town halls. I'm like, none of us as smart as all of us. And I show that I make mistakes so they feel better. I'm like, listen, I'm the CEO. I'll make a typo in an email, or I'll say something stupid to let them know, hey, we're all human here. We're not robots. We're human. We have feelings and thoughts. But also, we have gaps. Let's find those quicker so we can then move on. You either pay for it now or pay for it later. Let's fix this stuff now so then we can accelerate down the road, instead of coming to the command prompt going, what do we do now? Because we robbed Peter to pay Paul. And then guess what? Something happened on the product development side, or procurement. And it was like, whoops. And then you're scrambling and everybody's upset. And then you lose the momentum you've built with a gap.
Right. And then as you're doing all that restructuring, collecting all those points and building that plan, you often find that you need new people. And that could be its own challenge, right?
It is, and now of being a first-time CEO, I even commended my board. I said, you rolled the dice on me being a first-time CEO. I was up against lots of experienced CEOs in the past. And so I knew what I was up against in terms of capabilities and skill sets and accolades.
Mm,
And so you inherit teams. And this is what I've learned is a lot of CEOs historically will bring in their leadership team because they can trust those people,
mm,
subject matter expertise. I mean, it all makes sense. And I've got a million leadership books on my shelf, CEO Next Door, CEO Excellence to how to leading and running teams. And it comes down to org health and people, though. You have to have the right people, especially in lean operations where you're running to EBITDA, right? EBITDA and growth to get to your profitability, your rule of 40 number now. Those are a lot of pressures, and you can't wait to make a change. Either maybe wrong person in the wrong role, or maybe they're just not a fit for the company and you got to rip the Band-Aid off like now. And I had to do that last week with a couple of people.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's always painful, right? Go ahead, Matt. I didn't mean to step on you there.
No, no, not at all. I mean, coming in and obviously, as you talk about gaps, is everyone in the right role? Is anyone could be in a different role, right? And then eventually you end up with what else do we need to fill? Which leads to the whole thing around hiring now, which I think has been a challenge for on both sides for a couple years now. I mean, what are your experiences there in terms of getting hiring done and hiring done right, as
Oh,
opposed to just filling the seat?
I thought about this. Let's talk about the failures, right? Because I love talking about it because I think I've learned too, and maybe this is just getting older, guys. I don't know. I have no shame. And we need to share this too, especially for the younger generation. Younger people that want to come up. I'm like, listen, you're going to make mistakes, embrace those because that means that
Yeah.
you're learning something.
Mm.
And so I've made critical errors on two fronts. One, being in growth equity backed companies, there is a lot of pressure by their calculations or their Excel sheets and what your aggressive and new ARR goals are going to be, or 30% plus year over year for 3 years. I'm like, good grief, that's a lot. How are we going to get
Mm,
there? And then with the people, and then you have like hiring plans. I remember one time at our board meeting, it was a QBR. I didn't meet my hiring plans and I got in trouble. I'm like, well, I'm trying to find quality people. So then you rush to get bodies in seats, and bodies in seats do not equal productivity, right? It's kind of like, don't confuse motion with progress. Just because you're
mm,
busy and you got people making calls, it's like, well, anybody could do that. I can make 50 calls right now and have zero pipeline created and no opportunities. Well, what happened? Yogi Berra said, if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up someplace else. I use that frequently with my teams and have for years, but I made mistakes hiring people to fulfill my own quotas on headcount because of the investment dollars. And then guess what happens? You end up terminating them. And so you've hurt them, you've hurt the business. And most importantly, we've hurt the internal company because now we've just wasted time, money, resources. And now I got to train people all over again. And so I think now companies, including myself, there are roles we can probably hire quicker versus others. But now you want to be intentional because you want them to be there long term because the amount of money it cost us. And then how do we continue to build pipeline and execute really well? So hopefully does that answer your question, Matt? I can go deeper, but
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just curious, what are some of the roles that you think take a longer time? I mean, I know it really varies by position, but are there any specific ones that are a little bit more challenging that you want to make sure that you get right?
absolutely. So sales leadership is important because
Mm.
once again, I can hire an account executive and we could suss them out or flesh out a resume pretty quickly or get on a call like this. And, that's how I do it is, walk through pipeline management or calls or scripts or, engagement. Do they have the abilities and attitude? Are they coachable in other areas that are efficient? I can figure that out pretty quick. That's human to human connection. But where it becomes more difficult is hiring sales managers, directors, VPs, and then we can get into like a CTO I brought on. I mean, talk about life, like mission critical execution from a daily and a quarterly basis is, do they understand pipeline management? Do they understand how to have one-on-ones and coach people and be responsible versus being busy? It's building them up. Kevin, like we talked about, it's all about
mm,
building a culture of excellence and accolades and always training. Because managers, I had this in Gong. I had to be in Gong. I had 23 people reporting to me. I couldn't get a manager. There wasn't budget, even though there was. So I'm like, okay, this is difficult. So you're spending Saturday, Sunday, and sleep time. The 3 S's I learned in my info systems class in college in the early thousands is you're going through Gong calls. And this is before they incorporated AI, thank goodness. But you're trying to figure out, okay, what are they doing really well at? It's like golf. If you don't play it regularly, you're going to be bad. It's sales. If you're not a good sales leader and you're not in there every day showing your employees and your salespeople what good looks like, no wonder why their numbers aren't going to be great, or you were going to miss gaps, right? Going back to the gap. There's this really good influencer, Kevin, KD Dorsey, I met through Level Equity Partners. He's a phenomenon, like a huge sensation. He's super passionate about sales leadership and coaching and training people up. And I learned a lot from him. And I've gotten to know him personally. Just a wonderful guy that helped me make sure that I'm focusing on the right things for the employee.
So I understand having to fill seats of critical roles before. I know that it can often be challenging to find the right person to fill that role. But it's interesting. And we had a conversation about this as you were talking about the interview track that you were following to get into the position you're in now. You've mentioned it was highly competitive. It just seems to be, and there's a lot of folks that will be listening to our call who unfortunately are on the side of looking for a position inside of the industry today. There seems to be a perception on those on the interviewee side that the number of interviews, the complexity of the interviews are far more arduous than they ever were in the past. Now, obviously, you're going to need to get the right fit. Is there other reasons why we are finding ourselves with those protracted interview windows as both the hirer and the hiree?
Yes, I'll use my personal experience. My interview process for CEO was over 2 months. In fact, one of my mentors, again, highly successful CEO, NASDAQ CEO, he goes, I commend your board. He's like, we don't spend that much time hiring CEOs or C-suite executives. And so I think what happened was for these companies that have a lot of growth and targets in mind, leadership and a lot of money on the line, and let's say there was a misfire before, right? It happens. It's common. It can happen. They have one shot to get it right again. And so I think there's that, you ready, fire, aim. You want to make sure you get it out the gate and, versus 80-20, maybe it's 90-10 or maybe it's 95-5 in terms of getting your ducks in a row. I can't tell you how many debrief calls I had, preparation. I mean, I spent Memorial Day weekend. There was a call on a Monday on Memorial Day. And I said, yes, because you're not going to say no. So I said, absolutely, I'll do it on Memorial Day weekend. Spent all weekend practicing all the questions and the prompts and then going back and just, getting peppered by these questions. You just walk away going, oh my gosh, that was a train wreck. And then how do you think you did? And most of us are probably hard on ourselves. But I think the reality is people are afraid to screw up and make mistakes, even at the board level, even at the executive level, because we're all human. I think we get this perception that that's not the case and that we have our act together. And reality is we still have feelings and emotions. I also think companies are overcomplicating it too, though. Let's look at larger companies too. Companies of, let's say, middle market, upper middle market companies, 1,000, 2,500 workers. I think HR overcomplicates it, interview after interview. And that hurts the candidate too, because it's like, how much do you really want to talk to me? Because for me, interviews are, can this person articulate themselves well? Do I think they're trustworthy? Because all of our interviews now are done via Teams and things like that. We're no longer in offices, which it's hard to size up somebody when they're sitting across from a table from you versus our environment here. So you have to put a lot of faith in technology and how the person presents. So maybe you now have 4 calls versus 2 in-face interviews, where we used to just have, remember, people did the round robins coming into the offices and you're like a candidate, you're like, oh, who's next? It's like the Price is Right. What's behind door 3? And so I think that's kind of compounded interviewing. And then let's be real. Let's look at the job layoffs and the saturated market. Now there's huge candidate pools to pull from. People are like, well, we'll take our time. We'll find the right candidate out there. We'll spend 90 days or 6 months interviewing for a role, and they're willing to give up revenue for that. Do I agree with it? Probably not. I think we could, you could cut that in half and take your chances if you have good interview questions.
But you bring up an interesting point there. So the criticality of the role, the impact and consequence of getting a bad hire into a critical role, and taking the time to make sure you're getting the right fit. I mean, I understand exactly where you're going there. And we had a brief conversation about this because I know you came up from the consulting ranks as well. Do you think that that's where organizations like fractional consulting firms that can come in and act in that role, you get instant pudding with respect to the person coming in with experience and expertise to make an impact and hold the fort on that critical role that you've got inside your organization? So you have got the time to go out and get it right. Do you think that with the surge of fractional consultancies that are out there, is that also partly why organizations feel enabled to do that?
I mean, it could be because let's go back to our gap thing. If you hire a fractional person that has subject matter expertise, let's say in your industry, you as an executive team are like, okay, Kevin knows what he's talking about. Matt's part of Kevin's team. They're coming in. They know they can jump in immediately and fix the problem. However, I think the challenge that I see is, how did I think it? Hiring fast can fix today's problem, but it'll create maybe turnover or friction tomorrow, right? Ralph Waldo Emerson said, your decisions you make today count twice as much tomorrow. Okay, so you get a fractional person in, but here's the problem I see. And you could probably tell I'm very relational. Some of my skill sets are interpersonal communication and connecting with people. So you can get a fractional person in there to do sales, marketing, finance person. And the company's like, this is a great deal. We're 1099 them and we're saving money. That's wonderful. But the problem is they're a consultant. And unless it's, I think, a shorter stint, you're not building relational equity with the teams. So what happens when you don't do that? Trust isn't there. Team collaboration isn't there. You're going to lose out on a lot of things that propel our companies in terms of a team environment and how those are structured and built. And that's with leadership. So if you have a C-suite leadership role that's fractional, I think you're going to pay the piper down the road. I could be wrong. I mean, I'm sure there's companies that have seen success with it, but I think that's the gap that I see from a fractional point, where companies now are inclined to do that, maybe to save on money because they're unsure, right? The last few quarters have been very awkward. M&A's down. So they're like, let's just go hire someone to keep us through 2025 as we watch interest rates or what global economics are doing. Those also play and complicate an already complicated business because it's people run and it's sales.
Absolutely. But and I think you identified it correctly. When you're talking about the highest level echelon of leadership inside the organization, that's a figurehead that needs to be there. But at the support levels underneath, that's where you can get those economies of scale relative to expertise that's automatic, that can fit underneath the leadership role so that they can buoy the organization through those gaps where, like, say, instead of like talking about like a CRO, you need to have a VP of a particular region, or you need a head of enablement, or you need someone that's working in product marketing, where you can bring in that expertise and then buoy people through to mitigate the risk inside that organization of having that gap, but also mitigate the risk of getting a bad hire as well.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. But to your point about, and by the way, you're going to have to send me that quote, because I want to include that in the notations and the details of this episode. It's got to be in there. I thought that was brilliant. I want to make sure I get that one right, because there's the adage inside, you brought it up earlier, speed kills when it comes to sales. And it can either kill well or it can kill very badly. You and I had a conversation about the knee-jerk reaction that often happens inside of the organization. You just talked about it. You alluded to it earlier on. An organization gets a little bit of money and they immediately go and rush. They want to go out and grow their sales team, but they're putting the cart before the horse, the ready, fire, aim, as you called it just a moment ago. Tell me a little bit about that. What have been your experiences with organizations that have gone, okay, we got money, let's go hire people. And you're like, wait, what?
I've experienced that. So a couple roles ago, I was brought in as a VP of sales, first time ever for another EHS software business backed by a private equity company. And there were, like, I'll just call it 3 independent agents, State Farm agents, I felt like, when I walked into the business. Company was maybe like 5 million ARR. So, good business. Maybe I think 30 or 40 people, I think. I can't remember. It's been a few years. Could have been less. But what I'm getting at is, so I'm tasked with growing this company. Yes, there's capital infusion. Do I get all of it? Absolutely not. That's going to go for, product and other people and support and marketing. But I was tasked with hiring people. I'm like, well, before I hire people, maybe we should look at our go-to-market. Do we know who we're selling to and why? Do we know where we accelerate and why? Is this our strategic plan? Because once again, I could throw bodies at it, but that's just going to waste everybody's time because we're chasing business that either doesn't exist or our proposition isn't compelling enough, or our sales motion or motions don't line up with what's marketing doing. Have we communicated directly? Are we driving MQLs that are resonating with the prospects out there? Before, like, intent, indicators and Gartner came around. I mean, all the stuff we did years ago, before all the tech came around, is like, we need to have a plan and a process. And I think what I'm getting at too is, you have to put together a really good plan. What are the comp plans? What are the bogeys? What are they chasing after? Is the ACV attainable? Can we increase that? How many deals a year is that going to take? There's actually a lot of math behind, and I think I read this weekend. If you want to be a good leader and a manager as well, you must know math, but you got to know Excel, because if you can actually get down to science and prove it out, it is not an art. There's ways in which we can improve our sales skills if we're getting back to sales and hiring, because it's kind of the focus here. But you have to know your numbers and you have to know how you're going to get there, looking at the outcome and then work your way back from the outcome. And then, okay, it's going to take 4 people to get to this revenue goal of new logos, right? Not just expansion or preventing churn. It's actual new revenue being injected into the business, aside from, getting into NRR. So I think those are some of the things that we need to consider as leaders. And I don't think a lot of people are putting enough effort on that. And then they wonder why they fail, because we have to have good analytical data and a brain, or at least people, maybe some really good RevOps people that can help us. That's an important part.
So once you do all that kind of due diligence, defining the ICP, defining the value messaging for different things as well, how do you then take that to then hire salespeople correctly? I mean, what are the key things that you kind of use to kind of look for your targets in terms of who you're going to add to the organization?
Yeah, good question. So if I'm looking for like an AE level 1 or 2, maybe like an entry level person, because, don't have infinite budget. So, looking at like a 65-65 split, or maybe 75-75, something like that, reasonable to where they could live on their own and still make good commissions. I'm looking for the biggest thing that I look for is, do they have the right attitude? I can teach and coach. We can all learn anything we want. There's ChatGPT, YouTube, right? I mean, we're in an age where we can learn almost anything. But what you can't fix is somebody shoehorning their attitude into your culture. And if you have the wrong person with the wrong attitude, or they can't do, or a toxic traits, that will infect your team and hurt your team. And I've learned that you've got to have energetic, high people that are self-starters and achievers and have this tenacity to win and the hunger. If you don't hire for that, everything else, I think, honestly, is just kind of part and parcel, or maybe a moot point, because they're not going to listen to all that if they've got the wrong attitude, or maybe they're too prideful and arrogant. I don't like that on my teams. I don't care how good you are. If you're not a team player with me, people might disagree with me on that, but I want people to actually want to be here and actually be able to work with them and help build the company and have great ideas and be willing to meet me at the 50-yard line, in the middle of the field. That's what I want.
I think that's kind of the challenge, right? And so do you rely upon references? Do you rely upon 20 interviews? It's like, how do you get to that point? Are there certain things you pick up on? Again, it's really hard over Zoom and video to get that really a sense. So I think references, I think, are always key, in terms of who you know and who knows them. But are there any other things that you leverage to try to figure that out?
Yeah, outside references, the references are really good, personal and professional too, because I also look at social media. So here's one of the things that we've gotten good at over the years is somebody is going to be professional in terms of an interview. Go to their social media and see what they post on Facebook. Is that person who was in the interview reflective of how they behave outside of the business? Because they're an extension of the company. So if they're doing something that I don't think is of high moral character, or something I wouldn't want to representing me, I'm going to find that out. Personal references, we all know, are really good, because it's like, what's this person like outside of the office place? Do they represent the same characteristics that they drive in the business? And if so, that's what I want, because I want somebody that is like on that, who is built into their DNA. The other thing I like to do in interviews are really challenging their thought process. I look for high emotional intelligence. When I ask a question, I don't want a response right away. Steve Jobs used to do that. 19-second delay. That feels like an eternity. Could you imagine being in a room with Steve Jobs, asking him a question, and he spends 19 seconds formulating a response? But what I think that does is that shows me that this person has critical thinking skills. They're going to be my problem solver, because what do we do in sales? We are here to connect and solve our customers' challenges. We already know they want a product because they already submitted a demo or a trial request. And so it's like, all right, so move that out of the way. Can we then go down the path of discovery, making sure that we're asking them the right questions and being conversational and intentional with sales training, for example? And that's what I really like to do in an interview process is, what's their thought process? Like, how do you work? What gets you going?
Yeah, I understand, having run enablement for a long period of time. I can teach someone technology. I can teach them how an application works. I can teach them all the information about what the value proposition is. A lot harder to teach them to be curious, to be thoughtful inside of that process of asking those questions, to establish that rapport, to establish that understanding with people. So with that being considered, what are some of the risks that are involved from your perspective when you're getting this pressure that's coming down from on high? Now you're a CEO, so it'd be coming from the board, to go and take actions, or you were talking about the sales numbers. They come down with an unrealistic, we want you to hit 40% of growth this year, and your data internally says 20. How do you guys address that then, so you don't get forced into doing some of these bad decisions, or potentially detrimental actions.
I like to start with analytics. So facts are there for a reason. That way I don't say the ums and ors, or I feel. Okay, we all have feelings, but that doesn't solve the problem. So I like to look at things like, well, okay, if you want these numbers, let's go back to what happened in the beginning. Who put the go-to-market together? Does the go-to-market still align with what's happened in the industry today? What's our total addressable market? What's our average contract value? Are we confident we're actually selling to the right people for our product? Does our product fit the market? What's the sales cycle? Are we talking 80-day sales cycles, or are we more on the upper middle market, maybe enterprise, where our sales cycle is 9 to 12 months plus? If that's the case, kind of going back to what I said earlier in the call, go look at the outcome and then do the math backwards and say, okay, fine. If you want $8.5 million of, let's just say, new revenue this year, new logo revenue, historically, our ACV has been, let's say, $75,000, and the average sales cycle is 2 days, and it's multiple touch points. You're going to have to make an awful lot of calls and conversions. And I think what happens is when you have people, and board members are very intelligent. Most of the time, they wouldn't be there if they weren't successful. But I think sometimes we have to tie that back to what is the outcome, to what is the financial math say for each salesperson, or capacity of salespeople based on how many calls can they make, how many MQLs are getting pushed through, what is the sales accepted lead conversion rate, and then what's the actual market close rate. I remember a couple of years ago, we were working on our win rate. It was traditionally low. And I'm like, why? Why are we at 12 or 13%? We need to bump it up. The market was at, I think at the time, like 20 something percent, 30%. Then the market bumped back. And I had to explain to the board on my calls, hey, actually, this really good company that is known to train global companies in sales methodology and process has also admitted they've seen complete pullback on win and close rates. So then you tie that numbers in, not as an excuse, but to say, I want to talk reality here. And I think the hardest part that I've learned in pushing back on these companies is, and this happens, I remember one time at my first growth equity company, it was Providence Equity Partners. I think I can share that. I didn't say the company, but you get a phone call from your general manager, like, well, why do you need that? Well, because my manager asked. Well, who asked them? Well, my manager asked. And then finally you get to this, like somebody from the board asked them, and they do the game of phone tag. And so then you're scrambling as a team to pull data out of SFDC at the time. Why? Because they were may have been out of touch or didn't understand. And then we get into frenzy, and then we have these pressures put on us is how many numbers are actually realistic to achieve. And the average sales rep last year, I think the average sales rep, 40% of reps were hitting quota. I think we have a pretty big problem in the industry, and that's who is setting these quotas and why. And our sales leaders pushing back saying our teams are exhausted. Now these numbers are unreachable. No wonder why. They've just all given up. I don't know. That sounds like a doomsday thing, but I think it's a reality.
Yeah, I've seen so many times where it's like, oh, you need to double the sales number, double the number of reps you got. There you go. Problems. We know that doesn't work, right?
Yeah, throw more bodies at it. That'll solve the problem. No, it won't. That's exactly right. And then you freak out on Sunday night. Oh my gosh, I'm going to get these reports, or how am I going to do this? Or you're putting your data into your QBR slide deck, and you just feel. I can't tell you how many times I felt uneasy. I hated going into those calls because I had an activist board member. Even when we won, you guys, even when we were like 114% above at quota, I still would do something wrong. It's like, man, you can't win for losing. So, and that's on a good day. And I think more salespeople need to be in other leadership roles because we know what it takes. And I think we need to bring some sense and sensibility, and also maybe pull back on some of these unattainable growth numbers. Like, let's be realistic about what we're trying to do. And that's helping people and solve problems.
Right. You mentioned metrics a lot when you're talking about, planning appropriately, et cetera. I imagine for every department across the company, there's certain metrics that are obviously much different, but do you try to have kind of a set of numbers or things that you're measuring towards in each department? And how are you with getting those?
I'm going through that right now. In fact, I was speaking with my chairman of the board. I speak with him regularly, and we were working on new metrics for our business. What are we benchmarking ourselves across? And for a high growth, kind of a startup-ish company, again, volatile companies don't like KPIs. And I think a lot of companies, and I want to make sure I don't misrepresent myself. Metrics are great, but to your point, Matt, it's what are you measuring and how many are you measuring? I think we can metric ourselves to death. Yeah. I like a handful, maybe 5, typically, ARR, cash on hand, hiring, churn, NRR. The important indicators are our customers sticking with us. Why? Is expansion up? Is contraction down? Is churn up or down? Why? Is it M&A? Are they going out of business? I can accept that for churn. If it's churn because of a product issue or pricing, that's unacceptable to me. So we need to know why we're losing them and then fix that problem. Office of the CTO. I got into the tickets. I'm like, what's the deal with our ticketing? Walk me through this. Like, well, all the tickets are customer success related because of username and password stuff. I'm like, still? Like, that was a problem like 12, 13, 14 years ago. Let's fix that. They're like, oh my gosh, really? I'm like, yes, let's fix that, because now we're consuming, and developers are expensive. I mean, they're really expensive. They can be more than some senior executives if you got a really good developer on hand, because they keep our platforms moving and together. So like going back and fixing some of the most simple problems, going back to my question on hiring, I think we overcomplicate it. And somebody wants to bring in some new, I mean, how many Excel sheets have you guys seen with like 20,000 tabs at the bottom? Like, oh my gosh. I'm like, I have an MBA in finance, and even I'm like, I don't know what I'm looking at. Can somebody help me? Is GPT there to analyze what this chart says?
Break it on down for me here, ChatGPT.
I think we get consumed with all this technology and stuff. And maybe I don't know, am I wrong? Have we like ventured off on, I don't know if growth equity, I've done a lot of consulting calls over the last year. I'm like, I think growth equity has done great things, but I think it's taken away what founders, really people that have built companies based on a passion or a desire to help people or fix or solve a problem. Have we lost sight of what that is over generating revenue? Yes, it's capitalism. I love it. It's great. We've all done well in it. But maybe we need to pull back a little bit and figure out what are we really trying to solve, and actually lead companies instead of exhaust our people week on and week out for money.
I like that. I mean, last thing, Kevin, and I'll let you go. Let you get in here. Sorry, but
it's fine. I'm enjoying your questions.
I do think we've optimized and gamified every aspect of everything so much that it's taken the humanity out of a lot of it, right? And I think it's a problem across the board. We've just gotten so good at just slicing everything up so much just to get the slight advantage. I think there'll be a little bit of a swing back. And so it's interesting to see kind of where we are with that right now, because there is so much information. There is so much data, right? And I think that's why, the AI chat GPTs of the world and things are doing well, because it's just helping us like, okay, just break this down for me. Just please, right or wrong in terms of what it comes up with. But, we're all seeking that from somewhere.
That was well put. It's overwhelming. Like I get on LinkedIn and I'm a high functioning, high capacity person. I'm exhausted from these long LinkedIn posts or people sharing their story of how they're moving on or doing something else, or now we're gamifying. Like you said, I'm like, maybe we should go back to flip phones and reaching out to people. I still say Rolodex, right? And now I'm like I'm like, oh my gosh, should I seriously say Rolodex? I'm laughing at myself. Or I say film when I've got my iPhone. I'm like, I'm filming. My kid's like, what does that even mean? But what I'm getting at is I had reached out to a customer that was disappointed with us a couple weeks ago. And I said, we're going to do the right thing. I literally asked customer success, I'm like, get me his email and his number. I called the guy. We had a 30-minute conversation, one-on-one conversation. All we talked about was, I'm sorry, we can do better. Tell us how to improve and we'll do that. And that's what we did. We kept the human element there, and it felt so good. I didn't have a computer or metrics. I didn't have HubSpot telling me what my probability of whatever and who talked the most or the least and what the outcome is going to be. It was me calling Matt saying, can we have a conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a takeaway to take from this episode that I hope people get. I think it's that one. You alluded to it. You had defined it earlier on in the episode, which is find out which problem you're solving and stay focused on that, and stay focused on the big picture items, and make sure you understand the context of the stuff that you're looking at. Because we're drowning in data. And as a result, people have a tendency to fixate on the part of the data that they want to go and look at without realizing the context, the implications of what that data means to the bigger problem. That's true of leadership in terms of leading people and building teams and building trust, but it's also true of organizational direction as well.
That's it. I'm glad this kind of came out. I'm curious as to what the listeners are going to respond with. It's kind of fun just to speak just organically about these things, and maybe, I don't know, Matt, maybe like you said, humanize life and business a little more. Is this what happens when we get older, is we now have become philosophers in life? And, you remember this? And I think it's kind of neat how humans are built. Like in our early years, we were built to be aggressive. And I think that's important, hunter-gatherer mode of what we learned about years ago. You need that. But then as you get older, maybe we can take a step back and say, let's analyze ourselves for a minute and take a break. It's okay to do that. There's nothing wrong with that. We're not right.
Having kids has made a difference as well, of course, because you're not going to manage the kids through metrics, right? It's very human, very real.
Yeah, can you imagine trying to sit around the dinner table and dealing with your kids like you're running a sales meeting, like a forecasting call. Okay, Tommy, how did your quarter go today? Tell me, how are you doing with respect to, the Boy Scouts? I don't see any leadership coming out of you here. Yeah. Yeah, I want to be in the room when that one takes place, quite frankly.
I love that comment. I actually will. I'll tell you this. I had a manager and they didn't have kids. And I actually, and this was before I had kids. I think I was just recently married. I noticed it was a big problem. And I've noticed that people that have kids seem to have a different perspective on life because they ground us and they teach us humility and they teach us things about ourselves.
Oh,
And
they do indeed.
they galvanize us in like what the importance of life is and even leading and coaching other people. It's very interesting to think about that connection.
No, absolutely. I would love to. We could easily continue this conversation for like another half an hour to an hour, but we would be here all day, which I'd be fine with, but it would be a very long podcast. There's still so many things we could be uncovering about this. If any of the listeners are considering going into a C-level organization, if there's one that's recently come into the position, what advice might you give them, taking all the things we've been talking about today? If you could sit down with them over a cup of coffee, what are kind of the pearls of wisdom you'd drop for them?
Know yourself. We're old enough at this point to know who we are. Stand by your convictions. I wake up every day. I'm like, I have the ultimate authority and it's on me and I have to execute. So be confident in that and just know John Maxwell talks about failing forward. I embrace it. I'm like, okay, today I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, but good leaders lead with empathy. I think that is a sign of strength, not weakness, because it means that we now have the ability to sit and talk to Kevin and say, hey, look, I've been in your shoes, or what's bothering you today, or have a good enough relationship saying, we're all here getting paid to do a job, but like life happens. Look, right now, I've got kids running around, dogs are barking, finally inside. I wanted to like mute, but I can't because I'm on a live thing. Make it human, humanize the experience. And I'm telling you, you do that, it is amazing. The walls that come down. And I'm excited to say, like in the 6 weeks that I've been here, the employee sentiment is off the charts. And what did I didn't bring us some magic bullet. I sat down and talked to people, like regular people one-on-one, and say, how can I fix this? I need honesty from you. I can't fix what I don't know. We're in this together, and I'm going to lead by example. You lead from the back and not the front. Also, you cannot be worried about if people are going to judge you or not. I get along with a lot of people. There are people probably that don't like me, and I don't like some people. That's the way of life. Get over it. Get over yourself, because that's leadership. And if you've had leadership roles and you go into senior leadership, the air is thinner at the top, right? I remember growing up hearing that. It is absolutely true, and there's no excuses. You got to own it. If you can't gut it, stay where you're at. But if you want to take a challenge and actually sharpen yourself, it is a great ride, because where I am today versus a year ago versus 3 or 5 years ago, oh my gosh, night and day. And even just talking to you guys, it's like I remember being 20 saying, listen to guys like us talk. I'm like, I wonder what it's like to be them. And now you're the person in the room speaking from experience, like, what happened? Where'd the last 20 plus years go? So,
when did that happen?
When did
right?
that happen? I'm like, you didn't tell me about this. It's like, but that's the exciting part of life, is embrace the journey too. And don't be too hard on yourself, because we're all in the same boat, thinking the same thing. We're just not sharing it with one another. Be vulnerable. It's okay to do that. I think that's going to help make the difference from good companies to great companies. Great book.
Absolutely. I could not agree with you more. And to add to that, my thing would be, don't be afraid to make mistakes, but reach out, because that there's a tendency, the further, as the air gets thin, to pull in and stay within yourself and only talk to yourself, because you don't want to extend that burden out to anybody else. But there are people like you that they can reach out to, people like Matt and I. Get perspective from other people. Don't just keep it inside. You don't have to carry the burden alone. Bring in other perspectives and stick by your convictions. Wholeheartedly agree with you there. Corey, if people want to reach out to you for those very reasons, what's the best way for them to go and reach out to you?
Oh, I'm on LinkedIn, Corey Bruce. I think that's literally my name. I don't have any special acronyms. They could find me. I'm at SafetyIQ. I'm all over, or reach out through you guys. Please connect. I love helping people. Like I said, I'll jump this in because I'm kind of hijacking your question about connecting. But we were designed to do life together, and I taught a college course last semester, or last. I said, don't be afraid to ask for help. That's the one thing I told these 18 to 20-year-olds in a business class ready to graduate was, don't be afraid to raise your hand and say, how can you help me? People love to help other people. So yeah, I think LinkedIn's probably the easiest way to go.
Don't worry, we'll put the link to your profile on LinkedIn will be in the diddly-do down below in the description area of this episode. Give them a quick click, and then you guys can reach out to Corey. But unfortunately, that does bring us to the end of our episode today. Even though I've had a great time talking with Corey about this, you can see that we're all of us around the table here. We're getting very excited about these particular topics, and hopefully it was for you guys too. Matt, any thoughts or perspectives to share here before we wrap today?
No, just a pleasure, Corey. Good luck in your new endeavor there. I'm sure you do well, and really, really enjoyed talking with you.
Likewise, guys. Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed this today and sharing my experience, and I hope it's resonated or helped other people out listening.
I'm certain it has, and I want to echo Matt's comments about thanking you for coming on. I've had an absolute blast today, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I can't wait to have a conversation with you again. But ladies and gentlemen, as I said, that is the end of our episode today. So if you enjoyed what we said, please give a like, a follow, a subscribe. And to Corey's point, what did we get right? If you have feedback you'd like to share on any of the topics we had on today's episode, please drop a comment on whatever platform you're listening to us on. If you'd like, go to our website, buy our book, The Methodology that Matthew and I are often talking about on the show. Matthew, I've never called you Matthew before, but there we go.
I sound like my mom now.
I do. It's like whenever I used to get I knew how much trouble I was in by the number of middle names that got thrown in.
That's my generation too. I'm with you guys.
Oh yeah. If you heard all your middle names, be somewhere else because you were in serious trouble. But in all seriousness, please give us feedback. Go to our website, buy our book. But with that, until then, take care. Be well.